Hey friends, it's Jessica from Three Rivers Homestead, and in today's video I am going to be processing some of the extra roosters here on our homestead, and I'm going to be canning up that chicken into a couple different things. And so we'll have a little bit of both, some of the processing and some of the canning recipes, and we'll explain the whole process to you, except here on YouTube, I'm not able to get into a lot of the nitty-gritty details on chicken processing, and that is just because there is some censorship here. Those are things that not everybody wants to see, and so I want to assure you that we will not be getting into the nitty-gritty details of chicken processing in this video. But there are a ton of resources out there for things like that, which brings me to the sponsor of this video, which is Backwoods Home magazine and its sister magazine, Self-Reliance magazine. So you guys know on my channel here I do very few sponsorships. It's because I will only work with a company that I truly believe in and value the products that they sell, something that I would use. And this is a magazine, this is a publication. It's been around for over 3 decades. It's something that Adam and I were reading long before we even got on our homestead. And so this magazine, Backwoods Home magazine, has all of the nitty-gritty details that you're looking for. If you want guides on how to process animals from start to finish, things like hunting skills, all of the things that maybe you can't find on YouTube because of the censorship here, this is the magazine for you. If you like my content, this is what you want. It covers everything from food preservation, gardening, animal husbandry. There's even touches of homeschooling content in here, all self-reliance. And if you're someone who doesn't like nitty-gritty details like that, Self-Reliance, the sister magazine, is for you. This is pretty much a lot of the same content that's in this version, just without the butchering and a lot of the things like that that some people aren't interested in. So thanks to the magazine, my viewers can get 50% off a subscription, and you can check out the link in this video description to learn all about it. And stay tuned toward the end of the video. I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about why I love this magazine and why I chose to work with this company as a sponsor. So, all right. As I mentioned, we are going to be talking about chicken processing in this video, which is a sensitive thing. Some people aren't interested in that. So if you want to skip to the canning portion where we're taking the chicken, it's all ready to go like you would purchase from the store and get it into jars and on your pantry shelf, skip to this portion of the video and you can bypass all of that stuff that makes you uncomfortable. If you want to learn a little bit about how we process the extra roosters on our homestead, we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to show you my setup and then show you what I'm able to show you kind of from a distance and explain to you what we're doing while you watch. So let's go ahead and get started. So Adam got me all set up for everything that I would need to accomplish this task. He had some other pressing projects to work on this day, and so I am perfectly capable of handling this myself with just a helper. So let me show you what he got set up for me. This is what we call our kill cone area. These are just traffic cones that we put upside down. We have some buckets underneath to catch any blood or anything like that. We fill the buckets with water, and then later in this video I'll show you how we don't even waste that. That water will end up fertilizing plants here on the homestead. And then we have our evisceration table over here, just have my cutting board, and then my knives. This is a set of old hunting knives that Adam gave to me for this purpose. He bought himself a new set for hunting that he takes with him, and these are now my chicken butchering knives. I also keep a bottle here of food-grade hydrogen peroxide. This is for sanitizing surfaces. I like to sanitize in between each bird that I do. I keep a trash bag here for any waste products, and then I have a pot here on the propane cook stove going because we are going to take the chickens and put them directly into the pot once we're done to cook them up for canning later. So we're all set and ready to go. I'm doing this today with my buddy Levi. He wanted to learn the process, and so this is a fun opportunity for us to work together and spend a little one-on-one time. So this is a much simpler setup than I've shown you before when we have done large batches of meat birds. If we were doing, let's say, 25 to 50 meat birds at a time, it would be all hands on deck. Adam would be helping. We would set out our scalder and our plucker because when we do meat birds, we want to leave the skin on because those are chickens that we might end up roasting. But when you're working with roosters and old laying hens, the meat is much tougher. And I find that the only way we really enjoy that meat is if it's stewed, put into some kind of soup. And so because of that, it's just much easier for me to save the setup and the cleanup of all that extra equipment and just skin the birds. And so that is how I process roosters and old laying hens. So I'll remove all the skin and then the feathers with it, and then throw the leftover meat into the pot to cook down. And then I'll show you later on what we're going to do with that. Skinning the bird as opposed to scalding and plucking it does take a little bit of extra time, and the first couple birds that you'll do, there is kind of a learning curve to doing it, but once you get the hang of it, it really doesn't take that long. Doing it myself, it typically takes me about 10 minutes to do per bird, and that is when I have a young helper like this with me that I'm trying to go slowly and explain what I'm doing to him as I'm doing it so that he can learn from me. If I didn't have a young helper there that I was working at my own pace, it takes me about 8 minutes per bird from start to finish. So I'm not the fastest chicken processor, but it's actually a very manageable amount of time to process a small amount of birds. And when I'm using this kind of setup, I'm typically doing no more than maybe 8 to 10 birds at a time because that's what's manageable for me on my own with this type of setup. The ideal time to process a rooster is between about 18 to 24 weeks in age. If you get it much older than that, the meat is gonna get extremely tough because after 24 weeks, their hormones are setting in, and that maturity, those hormones really do cause the muscle and the meat and stuff to get really tough. So these birds that we're doing were 21 weeks. If you go much earlier than that, maybe before 18 weeks, the roosters just aren't a good enough size to really make it worth your time. I know a lot of people are really used to meat birds that you typically buy in the store. They have a lot of meat on the breast. It's a very white meat. It's kind of dry when you compare it to a heritage breed or a rooster. But you can see on these roosters, there isn't a ton of meat. You get a little bit of breast meat, you get some legs and thighs, but that's why you want to wait into that sweet spot of about 18 to 24 weeks because it's the right amount of meat and without the texture of it being too rough. So we have processed our birds. This includes skinning the birds and then eviscerating all of the innards from the birds. We don't waste any of that, the organs that we like to consume, we save. Anything that we don't like to consume become dog treats, so that nothing is wasted. And then once we have our bird all cleaned up, it goes directly into that pot of water that I showed you, and it begins to start cooking. It's really important that you cook it right away. If you set it aside and then cook it later, rigor mortis can set in on the bird, and that can also affect the texture. So if you're not going to cook it right away, you're going to want to let that meat rest for a couple days before you do cook it. And that's why for us, it's much easier to just throw it directly in the pot, and it just gets that step over with. I don't have to can it this day if I don't want to, but at least I can get it cooked and then put it in the fridge and deal with it, a couple days later, depending on how much energy I have. So this is the same process that I would use for old laying hens. Once again, those older hens are going to have tougher meat. That's where the saying, a tough old bird, comes from. So whenever you have tough meat, it's just really best. You're not going to want to roast those birds. You're going to want to turn them into some kind of stew or soup. And so this is the process that I use that gives me the very best results. I'm almost done here. I'm just cleaning up all of my equipment. This is just a really stress-free, laid-back way for me to process birds. We get it done, and then I can clean up while the chicken is cooking on the stove. You can see those buckets that I mentioned of water that contains the blood. There are a lot of people that spend a lot of money buying a dried blood meal to fertilize their garden beds. Well, this bloody water serves the same purpose. The blood is very high in certain minerals and things, and so I'm just using this to water my young fruit trees so that literally nothing goes to waste during this process, except for I did toss the skin and the feathers. So I'm gonna let that chicken cook long enough to make a nice rich broth. It's kind of on a very low flame, and I'm just gonna let that simmer while I go about our other tasks outside and continue working for a little bit. You'll see in a little bit that the dog is there guarding my cooked chicken, but also that the children are outside playing. A lot of people ask how our small children react to things like this. Well, we've just normalized this for them. I want them to know that while this is a very serious process, an animal gave their life to give us nourishment. But I also don't want it to be something they're afraid of. I want it to be something they respect and are used to. I feel like if they're going to eat the meat, seeing all of the work that goes into not only growing it and raising it, but also processing it, makes them less likely to waste that food and to just truly have an appreciation for it. So the kids are just used to it, and it's just a part of homestead life for them. So Adam's out there working, we're finishing up working. I am going to bring that chicken inside, let it cool down, and now let me show you how I'm going to go about getting this in our canning jars. So from our big pot of chicken, I got about 1.5 gallons of chicken broth after some of that water had evaporated. And we picked some of this off the bones for meals that day. And then what was left over, I'm picking off the bones for canning. And so you're going to see here there isn't a ton of meat per rooster. It is typically a darker meat, like I said, than what you're going to get from maybe a Cornish cross or another type of meat bird that you would get in the store. But I find rooster meat to be extremely rich and flavorful. It's just a different taste. It's not what you're used to buying in the store. So we pick every last bit of meat off of those bones. I'm going to pour off the extra broth, and then I can put this in the fridge and deal with it the next day because I was exhausted after all of that work. So I assessed the amount of meat that I was able to get from the remaining birds and realized that it was only going to fill for me about 6 quart jars. For a meal of chicken pot pie, we are typically going to use 2 of these quart jars. So this will just be enough for 3 meals. But hey, that is great. It's 3 more meals than we had at the beginning of the day. So I'm just dividing that chicken amongst those 6 quart jars and just filling them up evenly as much as I can. And then as soon as we get our chicken in there, we're going to start seasoning these jars. So I'm going to start with celery salt, and I'm doing 2 teaspoons. This is a homemade celery salt we made last year with equal parts of freeze-dried celery powder and salt. So 2 teaspoons will be a good amount per jar. The next thing I'm going to do is add a 1/2 teaspoon of turmeric. This is mostly just to give these jars a beautiful yellow flavor, or yellow color, excuse me. It just looks pretty in the jar. And then for some flavoring, we're doing 1 teaspoon of rosemary. And then I'm going to do 1 teaspoon of garlic scape powder. That's freeze-dried garlic scapes from the garden earlier this year. And then I'm filling the jars the rest of the way with, these are frozen mixed vegetables. They're an organic brand from Aldi. That's the best price I can find on this. It used to be through Azure Standard in the bulk frozen vegetables, but Aldi now has a better price per ounce on mixed veggies like this. If it were earlier in the gardening season, I would use veggies from our garden, but a lot of that, things like the corn have already been canned up. So I find buying these Aldi brand mixed vegetables is a really affordable way to do this. What I'm trying to make in these jars is a kind of a chicken pot pie base. So that's what I'm going for, and these mixed vegetables are a great addition to that meal. Now we're just going to fill the jars the rest of the way with some of that chicken broth that we were able to get from the pot of cooked chicken. Now you can tell that I really packed those jars pretty full. They were pretty tight, so I'm gonna debubble those just to make sure there's no trapped air either under the chicken or under the veggies. And then I'm gonna wanna adjust the headspace afterwards with the broth to maintain 1 inch from the top of the jar. Now that broth can be rather greasy, so we are gonna wipe the rims of our jars just to make sure we get a really good seal with our canning lids. And then as always, we're adding our 4 jars canning lids. These give me the best seal rate. And if you would like 10% off your own canning lids, check out the link in the video description and you can learn all about how you can do that. We're going to get our rings on top of these jars, and these are going to process in the pressure canner for 90 minutes due to the amount of meat that is in these jars and how much veggie is in there because they are packed pretty full. So after 90 minutes, we have beautiful jars of a chicken pot pie base. When I want to make chicken pot pie, I'll take 2 of these, I'll dump them into a pot and thicken up the broth with a little bit of arrowroot powder to make a gravy. And then I can either pour that over mashed potatoes and biscuits, or I can fill pie crust to make a chicken pot pie. Now, after we got that done, the next day I had that remaining broth in the fridge, and so I decided to go ahead and put that in some jars. Now, I'm only canning in pint jars on this day because I'm getting really low on quart jars. I need to go shopping. I've done a lot of canning this year, and I know I need the remaining quart jars that I have left for some things like pie filling and a few other projects that I have. And so canning them in pints is a great idea sometimes because there are days you don't need a full quart of broth, and maybe just a pint of chicken broth will get the job done. So that's what I am doing here. I have a lot more empty pint jars right now than I do quarts. And just like with any of our other canning, we are going to wipe those rims. And these broths can be used to just add to other meals. Even that chicken pot pie that I was talking about making, sometimes I might want to add a pint of extra broth to that just so that I can have more gravy in the mixture, just depending on the meal. So pints of chicken broth are going to process for 20 minutes in the pressure canner. If these were quarts of chicken broth, they would process for 25 minutes. And after they're done, it's so convenient to have this shelf-stable broth. I know a lot of people say that when they can their broth, they don't get a gel. The texture of it isn't like when you freeze or refrigerate your broth. But take your canned broth once as an experiment and put it in the fridge after you open it. Usually that canned broth will gel. So the high heat of canning doesn't necessarily kill the gelatinous properties of the broth. It's still just as nutritious of a product. And it's just so convenient to have it shelf stable versus having to use up all that freezer space to store all of this broth for when you need it. All right, and we're almost done. I just need to get all of the rings off of my jars. I got the jars all wiped down. We just need to label these and then we can take them down into the pantry to get them all stored away. You can see I keep my rings on a bungee cord and just hang that in the kitchen for whenever I need them. Labeling them with the year because the contents are pretty self-explanatory. And then adding them to my pantry shelves. Things are really filling up, you guys. I'm feeling very good about the work that we've done this growing season. We are going to be so well prepared for the winter and when the baby comes and have so much delicious homegrown, home-canned food to nourish us through the winter months when the garden isn't producing. So I hope that explained a little bit about how we process our hens and roosters and how I like to can it. This is just what I find gives us the best texture of meat. Okay, so hopefully you enjoyed this little peek into our process for getting those extra roosters and old laying hens from in your backyard to the jars on your pantry shelf for really quick and easy meals. And like I said, I want to thank the sponsor of this video, Backwoods Home Magazine. They have a sister magazine, which is Self-Reliance Magazine. As I mentioned in the beginning of the video, this is for people who want nitty-gritty info on all parts of homesteading, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And Self-Reliance is much less about maybe things like hunting and butchering and more just about food preservation and gardening and things like that. So they have an option for both of you. This publication has been around for 35 years. The magazine has 80% less advertisements than your average magazine. Each quarterly magazine contains about 116 pages of information. It's just quality reading material. And like I said, Adam and I were reading this long before we even moved to our homestead. We were reading this back when we lived in a neighborhood and we were dreaming about our homestead, trying to learn as many of the canning and gardening skills, hunting skills for Adam, things like that that we wanted when we moved to our homestead. So when I was contacted by this company to work with them, I was like, absolutely, I would love to, because I love your magazine and just think that this would be a huge blessing to people that want to learn more. There's so much you can learn from YouTube, but there are just some topics that you can't, and this is a great option for learning things like that. So like I said, my viewers get a special discount, 50% off if you follow the link in the video description. Don't miss out on this deal. If you're someone that enjoys my content and learning about gardening, homesteading, canning, all of those things, you are going to love this magazine. So like I said, you have two options: Backwoods Home magazine, and then you have Self-Reliance magazine, maybe if you are not as interested in the animal husbandry and hunting aspects of homesteading. So, all right, guys, I want to thank you for watching today's video. Things are winding down here. I'm tackling all of the things on my project list while I can and I have the energy. I'm now in the 3rd trimester. I'm getting a lot bigger and more tired. There are just a few more things. We're going to do one more chicken processing day. I have some more roosters that I was letting grow to a little bit larger size that I still need to process. I have a few more canning things to do. We still have some squash to harvest. I've got to get my garlic planted. Lots more fun things on the homestead that need to get done. But yeah, so it just feels good to at least get this first batch of roosters processed and off of my to-do list. So I'll be back next week with another video of what is going on around here at Three Rivers Homestead. Until then, I hope you all have a wonderful week. We will see you next week, friends. Bye.